Hello, my friends, and welcome back to another episode of Land Stories Live. I am your host, Dave Deniston of Generation Family Properties, LLC, where our goal is to help hundreds of people like you own land. And we would love to tell your land story. Well, I have the honor today of speaking with someone who definitely has some land stories to tell. And on top of that, she's had an incredible journey. She went to college, she went to law school, and then she had a change of heart and she started a farm. And so she's figuring it out step by step, talking to us about our journey. She was even featured on NBC not too long ago. Please help me welcome Lauren Manning. Welcome to the show, Lauren.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, it's awesome. It's so cool. I was getting to know some about you and your journey. I was remarking to you before we got started that you are someone who hustles. And I'm just inspired by what you're doing and really going after your passion and doing everything you can to make it work. So we're going to dive into that, but let's just start from the beginning. Tell us a little bit about you and where you grew up.
Sure. I'm a California native. I grew up in Sacramento, went to college at UC Santa Cruz, then came back to Sacramento for law school and started my practice in general civil litigation in Sacramento. And then about 4 years into practice, I enjoyed being an attorney, but I didn't quite feel like I was in the right practice area, or I wasn't sure if, that's what I wanted to do for the next 30 years of my career. And so I found a master's program at the University of Arkansas School of Law. It's an LLM program, which is a master's for attorneys in food and agriculture law and policy. I didn't grow up on a farm. There's not a single farmer in my family. I don't really know where I got the farming bug. But I thought, at least this master's would really help me figure out where I could apply my law degree to agriculture, into food, and to shift into some of those areas where there's a lot of really interesting and exciting things happening, especially in food labeling, food safety. So the program really opened a lot of doors for me. It was a massive life change. I moved sight unseen to Arkansas, which was, as a California native, again, I'd never even been to the South, which was quite an adventure. But long story short, I fell in love with the area, and 4 years later, I'm still living here.
Isn't that something? So I'm from California too, grew up in Southern California,
Great.
in Orange County, and now I'm all the way in Minnesota. And people sometimes like, why would you move out of California? And so I totally relate to what you're saying. And did in law school, as you're going through that, did you ever have an inkling that wasn't what you wanted to do? I mean, tell me about that moment when it was like, you know what, law isn't going to be it for me. Maybe it was when you're in practice. Tell us about that time.
There wasn't a defined moment. And growing up, it's funny, I was always really drawn to cattle and beef production. But if you're not born into that industry, I think it's intimidating to get into it. And it seems like it's typically a legacy type operation where you've been farming in your family for multiple generations, or you grow up in a rural area and you start working on a neighbor's farm. So I kind of felt like it was something that was intangible for me, and that it was something I would probably have to explore like in retirement. Once I retired, buy some land, get a few cows. And again, there wasn't a defined moment where I thought, oh, I should be a farmer. I just was interested in food production and interested in learning about agriculture. And, I already had my law degree, and I enjoy being a lawyer. And there's lots of really important work for lawyers to do in food and agriculture. And I know that now more than ever. And so for me, it was really, thinking, okay, I'm intimidated to just jump into farming. I don't have a background in it. I don't know a single farmer. So maybe I can use my law degree to kind of open that door and start practicing or applying my education into a field that I'm genuinely really interested and passionate about.
Interesting. So how'd you get started? Did you know moving to Arkansas that you were going to buy something? Like what happened? Take us through that.
Yeah. My parents ask that question all the time. They're still in California and they ask what happened all the time. So I had every intention of actually coming back to California. I thought I was only going to be in Arkansas for the 9-month duration of the master's program, maybe a year. But the month after I moved to Arkansas, and it's Northwest Arkansas, the Fayetteville area is gorgeous. It looks like California. It looks like Northern California in a lot of ways. I went on a farm tour that the local natural foods co-op organized. And the last stop on the farm tour was at a place called Ozark Pasture Beef, and it's run by Ron Morrow and Ann Wells. They've been business partners for decades. And it's a grass-fed, grass-finished, pasture-raised beef and lamb operation. And I was thinking to myself, if I'm going to create policy or represent farmers or just be involved in this field, I want to get some hands-on experience. And so I asked Ron, I said, I don't know anyone here. I've got all this spare time. Would you mind if I came on weekends? Could I intern, shadow you, just spend some time with you learning what it's like having a farming operation? And long story short, 4 years later, we tell people that I'm on the extended version of the farm tour, because what ended up happening is that I essentially apprenticed with them for 3 years and became very involved in the business, worked with the cattle every single day, worked with the sheep, learned about the marketing side of things, learned about animal health and wellness, learned about pasture management. And so it really wasn't until after that 3-year period that I thought, I'm ready to buy my own piece of land. So no, I didn't move to Arkansas thinking I was going to end up buying a farm here, but just by virtue of having worked with such phenomenal mentors who built me up and got me to that place where I was confident enough to buy my own farm, that's what ended up happening.
So how did you decide how did you decide to buy land itself? Like walk us through that process.
Yeah. And the first thing you have to realize with farmland is that it doesn't come up for sale very often. It's hard to find farm property that's for sale. So it took me overall, I'd say about 12 months from the time I really diligently started looking until I closed on this farm to find the right thing. And it's hard because when you decide that you're going to buy a farm, you've got your loan pre-approval letter, you just want to buy something and get started. Mm-hmm. And the fact that I had mentors, and I can't stress this enough to people, if you've got an experienced farmer who can kind of guide you through this process, or at least, look at properties with you, it makes all the difference. Because if I was just looking for land by myself, I probably would have bought something that's not very practical. And it's easy when you go visit a farm property to just fall in love with the romanticism or how beautiful it is, or, there's certain attributes you might look at. But then when you really think about it, a farm needs to be as practical as possible. And so you kind of have to walk into it with a sense of pragmatism and a checklist. And I wrote an article for Successful Farming that's got a pretty thorough checklist that I ended up creating over that 12-month period to just kind of keep me from making an emotional decision and keep it more of a practical decision. And some things that, I ended up really marking as essentials are fencing. Does it have perimeter fencing? Because when you start running costs on how much fencing costs, even 5-strand barbed wire, it can be cost prohibitive. Does it have water? Does it have ponds? Does it have shade? How close is it to town? What's the pasture quality? Is it really flat? Is it really hilly? And so instead of just thinking, oh gosh, this is beautiful, I could close on this tomorrow and start farming, I had to really coach myself. And, Ann and Ron were huge in this, to not just make an emotional decision.
Interesting. So obviously getting mentors was something very, very important for you in this process, having someone you could lean on to ask, hey, what about this versus that? And obviously you invested a lot of time into that relationship to help get that going.
Right. Yeah. Mentors is huge. If you're going to buy, and I think I tell people now, and there's a lot of people we meet, because Ann and Ron speak, they've spoken all over the country. We go to lots of conferences. We have a local grazing group. We're very active in the grazing community, in the farming community. And a lot of people just rush out and buy a farm having not spent any time around livestock. And I wish I was smart enough to have thought of this before I set out on this journey. But in hindsight, the best thing that happened to me was working on somebody else's farm for 3 years before I bought my own. Because you may think that you love pigs and then you always want to raise pigs, but you might get 6 months into it and think, I really hate this. People have a lot of romanticized notions about farming, or they think it's going to be one way. And from season to season, especially in this part of the country, it can be extremely different. And so I tell people all the time, that's great, you want to buy a farm, but why don't you go volunteer and work on somebody else's, just to really figure out what exactly you want.
Well, it's so interesting. I mean, talk about farms, and I picture in my brain, and I'm just visualizing, I see different kinds of fields. When I think of farms, I think of cornfields and soybean fields and having cattle and pigs, like all different kinds of crops and livestock. For you, when you're talking about farms, it sounds like almost that you don't necessarily have to have crops. Like, educate me and us on that. Like how do you view that? Like, do you have crops as well as animals, or?
Oh, no. Oh no, we're strictly livestock. And there certainly are people who do have, huge commodity crop operations as well as running, a couple hundred head of Black Angus cattle or something. I think that's a common combination. For me, and this is nothing against crop production, it's just, I'm just so in love with livestock production. And that's what really fascinates me. That's what I'm kind of obsessed with and want to learn more about. And here in Northwest Arkansas, there isn't really a lot of cropland or crop country. It's predominantly, poultry grow houses for Tyson. Tyson's located here, and then some cattle too. But I think farms, that what you're depicting and what most people in cities or consumers typically envision is, thousands of acres of soybeans in the Midwest.
Right. Yes. Yeah.
Around Iowa, things like that. It's interesting. 4 years ago, I probably would have maybe had the same conception, but in this part of the country, this is called the pasture belt. We have really, really great pasture here. We're spoiled with great warm season forages, great cool season forages. So we can graze a lot longer than people in other climates tend to be able to graze because we have such favorable weather for that kind of pasture cultivation. And so there's really a lot of livestock around here. And so most farms are livestock farms where there's not crops, there's just pasture.
Interesting. So, tell us about, I think about like with crops, people will not just rely on one crop. But what about with animals? Are you kind of rotating among animals? Like, do you have chickens, cows, sheep, emus? I don't know. What kind of, how did you decide on the livestock that you have, and what kind of livestock do you have now?
Right. And a lot of that, I'm sure, was sort of channeled by working with Ian and Ron. They've got, just a gorgeous herd of beef cattle, grass finished, and a huge sheep flock, and they're hair sheep, Katahdin hair sheep. And so that's primarily what I learned on. And I think that's, sort of what sent me in that direction. Beef production is such a huge industry in the United States, and there's such a growing demand for grass raised or grass finished, 100% grass fed beef. And I'm a big advocate for grass-fed beef. I think there's a lot of benefits to it. And I think more people are starting to learn about that. And the sheep too. We don't eat a ton of lamb here in the United States. I hope that's changing slowly but surely. But sheep are amazing animals. And the important thing too with running, cattle and sheep together is they actually eat different things. Cattle tend to eat just basic grass species like Bermuda, crabgrass, things like that, whereas sheep tend to like weeds. Ann always says, my sheep don't call them weeds, they call them forbs or dinner, because they love weeds. And there's lots of things like ragweed, for example, that sheep just are obsessed with. But my recent passion project is my goat herd. I've got about 35 meat goats. I'm expanding that herd slowly. And so right now on my farm, I have cattle, sheep, and goats. A fairly small number of each. This is a brand new farm. I'm still feeling things out. I don't have any cross fencing set up. We use rotational grazing for pasture management. But I find the goats to be very fascinating, and they especially eat things that the cattle and the sheep don't eat. They love trees and bushes. And I've done a few grazing experiments where they actually will eat poison hemlock. They love poison hemlock, and it doesn't really affect them the same way it would affect a human. So those are the three I'm primarily focused on right now.
That is so interesting. And I think about having livestock and trying to make money off it. I mean, gosh, I think about it. You bought, I'm sure, a decent sized piece of land. So there's an investment. You have to go and buy the initial livestock to go, and then those have to have babies. And like, you can't kill off all the ones that you have because you have to grow the herd. So coming from someone that's not a farmer, help me understand like that process. How do you manage that between growing the herd, but at the same time making some money? Like, is it just a long-term investment? How does that work?
Yeah, it very much is a long-term investment. And there's a lot of young farmers or new farmers who just run straight to the sale barn and they buy the first animals they see. And I think that tends to be a decision that they regret. And I think the animals you choose to purchase is a huge, huge important decision. And you have to make sure you're buying quality animals. You have to make sure that they're right for what you want to do. If you're buying cows that are used to having a pretty big grain ration and then you try and put them exclusively on grass, you're going to have some problems with that. I'm really fortunate, again, not to keep hitting the same point, but having mentors. I mean, they've helped me start not only my sheep flock, but my cattle herd too. And, we're doing certain arrangements, like a calf share arrangement, where if I'm doing custom grazing for them, we split the calves that come out of those cows. Because you're right, cattle are extremely expensive. And so they're helping me get started in that. The goats I have bought over time, but I started really slow. Honestly, I started with 7 goats. And goats are tricky. They're really difficult. They're demanding. And 7 was plenty to start with. And I think that's another mistake people tend to make is they run out and buy, 50 head of cattle. You can always buy more animals. And like you said, they procreate. They always have more, especially goats. Goats tend to have twins or triplets pretty frequently.
Huh.
But you got to remember with those offspring that they have, we're butchering the males for meat. And then females become what are called replacement stock. So, as older females age out, and some of the cows in the Ozark pasture beef cow herd are, 15 years or older, we need replacement cows to fill in as some of them age out. So it kind of balances itself in some ways. And, you can always sell animals if you suddenly realize you have too many, and you can always buy more. And we're also fortunate in that we're a partnership of 4 different farms. So we've got about 400 acres, give or take, that we all kind of manage and that we own. And so we've done situations where, right now, Ann and Ron's bull is here at my farm breeding the cows that are here, but it also kind of offloads that bull from their farm and helps their pastures rest in the meantime.
Because the bull chews it up, I guess, huh?
Yeah, he eats quite a bit. I mean, he's big, but it's just kind of nice to be able to have options in terms of taking animals other places.
Interesting. So tell us about the challenges of doing this whole thing. Walk us through what it's been like walking in your shoes the last few years.
I've been really spoiled along the way. And I think the biggest challenge is that I have so many off-farm jobs and off-farm commitments. And there are days certainly where I wish I could just farm full-time right now. And that is the ultimate goal for me, is to eventually be primarily farming full-time. I do a lot of journalism and news reporting in food and agriculture, and I really, really enjoy that. And I love teaching classes at the University of Arkansas. So those might always be in the mix to some degree, but building this farm and building Ozark pasture beef is ideally what I'd like to do. So sometimes, managing all of that, my classes and the news outlets that I write for, and then the farm, it can just get a little overwhelming. And I think what I've gotten pretty good at doing is kind of a triage system, what absolutely has to be taken care of today. And the nice thing about grass finished meat is that we're not feeding grain every single day. Certainly in winter, there are times where we do feed hay. But, in the farm startup too, this is a farm that doesn't have any outbuildings. There's no barn, there's no cross fence, there's no water system. I'm really lucky I've got 2 big sized ponds here. But there's a lot I want to do. Rotational grazing is a big foundation of what we do, and that primarily involves subdividing your pastures and limiting the animals' access to a pasture, and you only let them graze a certain paddock for a certain number of days, and then you move them onto another paddock, and that does a lot of things. It lets the paddock that they just graze rest and regrow. It helps with the parasite cycle. There's certain parasites that livestock can get, but that's a big investment, all that cross fencing and a water system. And sometimes I get really antsy and think, gosh, I just want to do this all tomorrow and have it set up. And what I've eventually started telling myself is, farming is not a finish line. It's a lifestyle, it's a way of living, it's a day-to-day type thing. And so I've had to really tell myself that there's no one's going to give me a gold medal if I finish this all tomorrow versus a year from now.
This is true. No one is. What are just some of the stories you can think of, Lauren, of having lived on the farm, interactions with the animals, what's that been like?
Kidding season is one of the most exciting times of the year. Goats are seasonal breeders, sheep are too. And I breed my goats to kid in March. They kid about the 2nd or 3rd week of March. And that's always it's like the Super Bowl of owning goats. It's kind of what you gear up for. Baby goats, one, are just insanely cute. But it's a really hectic time of the year. You're out there watching them. You're making sure everybody's okay. You're making sure kids are getting dried off in their nursing. And I find that the cows really seem to have strong mothering and they know what to do. And I'm not suggesting that goats don't, but there's some goats that just are not the best mothers. So you have to take a more hands-on approach with that and check on everybody. And sometimes, in Northwest Arkansas, March can be a really nasty time of year for us. We've had ice storms, we've had snow, and that's not really ideal conditions for being born. And so that's just a crazy time. And the other thing that's been a really interesting experience for me too is dealing with death, to be honest. We do have some predator problems. We've got coyotes, and what's actually, I think, more of a problem around here are people's dogs, loose dogs that they let run around. And they love to chase sheep and goats. They'll chase cows too, but they'll kill them. They'll kill them for sport. And, I've had farmer friends who have had half their sheep flock killed in about 15 minutes by a pack of dogs that are just wandering down the street.
Wow.
Yeah, and so just living with that level of, I think, not necessarily anxiety, but just always knowing that at any moment something could go wrong. A fence could break, stray dogs could get in, a coyote could show up, someone could have calving or kidding or lambing problems. It's just kind of an ongoing level of what could happen today that you have to deal with.
Well, there's some adrenaline with that too.
Yes, definitely. Daily dose of adrenaline.
Now, what do you love? Those are some of the challenges. What do you see as the pros of what you're doing and the awesome stuff?
Those challenges are actually what I think I love the most. I don't really like routine, and that's something that just being in an office environment, sitting in an office 10 hours a day, it's something that I ultimately didn't want to do for the long term. I like knowing that every morning when I wake up and walk outside, I'm not quite sure what's going to happen that day, for better or for worse. And those days where you find one of your goats has been attacked by a predator, and that hasn't happened too often at this farm. I've only had 1 or 2 predator attacks. But it's kind of great living so close with nature. And I know that may sound cheesy to a lot of people, but I've lived in San Francisco, I've lived in apartments, I've lived in lots of different places. And I think there's so much to be said when you live in such a beautiful place. And my farm has a gorgeous view. I'm really spoiled. And I think in a lot of ways, I'm healthier. I don't get sick as often. I have a much greater appreciation for nature and for what animals are capable of doing. And, I learn something new every single day, whether it's identifying a new type of forage, whether it's learning about something new that I find out sheep really love to eat that I didn't know they like to eat, or whether it's having people in my community, whether that's people at the university, people from my gym, come out to my farm and they bring their kids. And these people have never, been around a cow or seen a goat. And it's so phenomenal to me to be able to open the door to them and say, yes, come to my farm. I'll answer any questions that you have. Because I think consumers more than ever, they really want to learn about food production and they want to understand it. And so to kind of be a liaison for that, having very recently been, a consumer myself without much farm background, it's really special.
That is so cool. I mean, just something about passion and spreading that passion and people appreciating, the other side of it, right? I mean, like we go to the grocery store and we get meat. We don't think about necessarily the process of what someone like yourself has to go through to get it there. And so I just appreciate you spreading that. Now I know, Lauren, one of the things that was covered in that NBC interview was how there are the average age of a farmer is like 60 years old. And there's like 1 out of every 7 farmers that's below 35 or something like that. So I'm curious to get your take on what that's been like and what you see out there and how you'd encourage the younger generation to come and farm and take some risk and do what you're doing.
Yeah, this is something we talk about quite often, and we're always looking for young people to join our grazing group. And with those statistics, another one that the USDA has put out is that only 4% of farmers who are primary operators, meaning they are responsible for the farm, are women under the age of 35. And I'm 33 right now. And so that's always been pretty cool to me to be such a minority group of, farmers, women under the age of 35 who are in charge of a farm by themselves. And I think I'm seeing a lot more women being interested in livestock. And, in some ways, I don't want to sound super biased, but I think women have a lot of natural aptitude for taking care of animals, especially during breeding season, calving, lambing, things like that. That's really phenomenal. And so I'm always really excited when I see other women wanting to get involved with farming. But yeah, it can be a little bit discouraging at times when I myself have realized how many barriers there are to farming. And I'm not even farming full time at this point. It's very much like a flashlight farming type job where I have all of these off farm jobs that, are my primary responsibility. I'm getting paid to do these things. I have to support myself. I'm investing a lot of my income into the farm. The farm is not financially self-sufficient quite yet, in a lot of ways. And so I understand why people think it's such an overwhelming endeavor. And what we always talk about is, how can we create situations, more formal situations, to connect people like me with people like Ann and Ron? Because I think had I not gone on that farm tour, I don't think I would be sitting here on my own farm today. Because I think I needed to have those mentors to kind of give me the confidence and to be my safety net, to be perfectly honest. The fact that I can call them at any single time and say, I'm having this problem, what do you think I should do, is really empowering. And so what we're really hopeful for is more opportunities to have, land link programs or farm link programs, or even informal meetups between farmers whose children don't want to come back to the farm. We're seeing that more often now, where, children who are going to inherit a farm business don't really have any interest in running that business. So how can we link those parents with, someone in their area who is just dying to have a farm, or have a mentor, have someone to help them learn? Because I think the way that we create a successful new generation of farmers is by creating apprenticeship opportunities like what I had.
Well, that's beautiful. No, I totally, I'm on board with that. And Lauren, what are some, as we wrap up the podcast, what are some great resources that you would point people towards that are listening right now and are interested in pursuing this further?
Yeah, that's a tough one, because it depends on where you are geographically. And, I know a lot of people like to go to Facebook groups or social media. You can find good information there, but I just try and remind people that it's often anecdotal evidence from other farmers. And I always kind of take what I read with a grain of salt, and you can make good connections. I've made some friends on Instagram who I've actually never met in real life, but they also raise goats or have cattle or sheep, or they're passionate about grass-finished meat. And we talk to each other, and we ask each other questions, we share things. And, the community, social media is really interesting. And there's a lot of, I think, negative aspects to it, but when used properly, it can be a really amazing tool to connect people. And in the past, I'd say year or so, on my Instagram account, I've started sharing, very, very unedited, candid information and day-to-day looks at what it's like to have a livestock farm and to be a beginning farmer and to juggle all of these things. And it's really, I think, been well received by a lot of people who say, thank you for showing us all sides of this. Of course, they love adorable pictures of newborn baby goats. Who doesn't love that? But, I share with them about things like butchering. It's hard to butcher these animals sometimes. We're very proud of ourselves. We're proud of what we do. But you do get kind of attached to these animals. And so butchering day has a lot of conflicting feelings for us. And I think a lot of consumers really like to hear that and like to learn more about it. There's also extension offices at a few universities, or NRCS offices. There's government resources. In fact, I should mention, to purchase this farm, I actually used a USDA program and a FSA program. And through this program, if you can show that you have 3 years of experience managing a farm, FSA will actually pay your down payment for you. And for a lot of people who want to buy land, that down payment is what's really the biggest barrier to overcome. And I couldn't have bought this farm without that assistance. So go talk to Farm Credit, talk to FSA, see what kind of financial assistance programs are out there for you. But if there's any farming groups, if you can find some kind of local farming group, whether it's informal or not, our grassroots grazing group here is very informal and started a long time ago, but it's just been self-perpetuating. So just look for farmers really like talking to people. I think if you just approach them respectfully and just tell them, hey, I just have a lot of questions. I realize some of them may sound like dumb questions to you, but I really just want to learn. I'm very curious. I think I want to do this. I find most of them are really receptive because they love sharing what they do and they're very proud of it.
That's great. Great advice. Thank you for all those resources, and especially on the financing side, if anyone wants to be able to finance it. Lauren, any other closing thoughts as we wrap up the podcast?
Yeah, I am happy to talk with people one-on-one about buying a farm. If you want to find me on Instagram, it's White Hoof Acres on Instagram, or you can, I think, Google me and maybe find it that way. But, I understand how hard it is. I understand the challenges, and I'm always very happy to give people, really candid, I don't want to say advice, but just sort of share my experience and to maybe give them the 2 cents that I've picked up along the way. But, I would tell people that if you think you have to wait a really long time to farm, that may not necessarily be true. And if you're willing to go work on somebody else's farm, and if you do that, be ready to show up and work hard. Make sure if you say I'm going to show up here every Saturday morning at the farmer's market, make sure you follow through on that. But find ways to start getting involved in farming, because if you start investing that time now, when the day comes that you are ready to buy your own farm, you're going to be so much better educated about the right farm for you.
Well, it sounds like you wouldn't have gotten that loan without the 3 years of experience too.
That's exactly right. Yeah. And Ann and Ron wrote a letter of recommendation with my loan application. I think it made all the difference, especially being able to have that down payment, but then to just say to FSA and Farm Credit, hey, this is not going to be a wasted investment for you guys. I've learned for 3 years. I know what to do. I have a support system, and they're really great lenders to work with.
Well, that's great. Well, thank you so much for being on the podcast, Lauren. It's a pleasure been having you on.
Thank you so much. This was great.
All right, my friends. Well, that wraps up the episode for today. If you want to be able to join us live, join us every Monday at 11:30 a.m. Central, Tuesday at 4:30 p.m. Central. And if you have a question about land, definitely send it to me, contact@genfamproperties.com. Thank you so much for tuning into Land Stories with me, Dave Deniston, and our special host, Lauren Manning. Make sure to check out all of our properties at genfamproperties.com. Have any questions? Want to speak with me? Give me a call, 775-234-2058.